Before we get into today's video, please quickly check below to see if you've subscribed. It's totally free and allows you to never miss one of our videos.
The observation saucer moved like a drunken moorfly through Earth's atmosphere, bobbing and weaving to avoid the laser beams sizzling through the sky.
You said they don't have energy weapons,
Sag shouted as he frantically worked the two-man scout ship's controls. You're not supposed to, Rossin protested, his fingers flying over his control board in order to keep a steady stream of interference waves on the multiple missiles attempting to lock onto them. The reports we stole from the commandants indicated that solid-state projectiles and tracking explosives were the best they had managed when they made contact. That was only a few decades ago.
They're not supposed to be able to detect us at all either. Our cloak isn't the best, but it should be more than enough for a pre-FTL sieve,
Sag said, yanking hard on the flight stick. The saucer shot straight up, causing the sleek atmospheric interceptor chasing the craft to overshoot. It began to swing around, but the saucer was already blasting back into orbit, well outside the range of the jets and ground batteries it had just evaded. Sag cursed in 7 languages as the saucer detected the activation of multiple defense satellites around them.
If we can clear Earth orbit, we'll be fine. They're trapped on Earth. They can't pursue.
Sag and Rossin were advanced scouts in the Farrakin Royal Space Navy, and this was supposed to have been an easy assignment. Sag knew this because if it had been a hard assignment, it would have been given to someone with a better service record, and not someone who had avoided sewage treatment detail by 1 demerit. True, their letter of briefing had words on it saying that the High King of all Faraka had assigned them the glorious task of determining the veracity of captured foreign intelligence. But it was more likely their mission was the fault of another astoundingly bored bureaucrat who had pulled their names out of a hat. This was supposed to be the scouting equivalent of heading down to the market to purchase a jug of jam-jam juice. Anything involving energy weapons, even lasers, put it firmly in the "actually, you do need to pay attention" category. Sag hated paying attention. Maybe that part about how fast the humans are advancing was true, Rossin suggested. Glorpslop, Sag snapped, slamming a broad foot on a thrust panel. The saucer shot towards the moon just in time to avoid a second volley of laser light.
The commandants probably just handed them some scraps of older technology. They're almost as soft-hearted as the Zok Juffo were. You can't!
Rossin squeaked and made a gesture, and Sag growled in frustration. He'd forgotten about the bases on the moon. A quick, if not gentle, jerk of the controls, and the ship swung towards deep space, leaving the defenses of Earth activating fruitlessly behind them like an angry beehive. Both aliens slumped in their seats, the tension draining from their gray, rubbery bodies. Why did they have satellite defenses? Rossin wondered. The report said they were ignorant of the greater galactic community. Did they actually know about us? Well, Rossin looked down at his controls. I guess they know now.
Let's just be glad they're trapped on Earth,
Sag said, rubbing his 4 dark eyes.
I can't believe we had such a narrow escape from a pre-FTL civilization. Why were they so hostile? We hadn't even done anything yet.
Well, Rossin said, his eyes fixed on the displays around him. If they are in contact with the commandants, perhaps they told them we are not to be trusted.
But we are to be trusted,
Sag exclaimed, standing up from his seat.
What have we ever done to the commandants except for a little petty espionage here and there? Even with the great contest going on, we've been relatively clean about things.
Sag hated the great contest, mainly because he was convinced that if there were no great contest, his job would be even easier. True, it had replaced the vast wars that had devastated the galaxy for millions of years and wiped out thousands of spaceborne species, but the Farrakin scouts still had to keep an eye on the other civilizations. The prize for winning the contest was still rulership of the galaxy. It was just being done peacefully now. So instead of recording troop movements and fleet locations, the scouts kept quiet, careful track of their rivals' progress in the contest. It was actually quite difficult, since the contest's goal was to produce a perfect society. Most scouts had no idea what that would look like, so they had to compile truly gigantic reports about all activity in a given area, and hope that analysts further up the chain would find something useful in the morass of data. Being a scout now meant you spent more time on paperwork than piloting your observation saucer. No more daring flybys or chances to go down in legend, just forms to fill out. Though, after nearly being slagged out of the air by an interceptor laser, Sag began to wonder if maybe the great contest was so bad after all.
"Maybe we aren't the ones the humans were warned about," Rawson ventured. "The Vortiem."
The Vortiem,
Sag hissed the words through his teeth.
those hive-minded biomorphed psychopaths. Of course, a primitive civilization hears a few of the horror stories about them, and they're going to be all beams and blasters instead of wide smiles and welcomes when a first contact team shows up.
The Vortiem's approach to building a perfect society in order to win the universe was uniquely horrific. Everyone else had approached the same problem through advancing science, culture, or even codes of law. But after much thought, the Vortiem settled on approaching it through assimilation. A society could have no strife or chaos if there were no disagreements among its members. There could be no disagreements if they were all part of the same hive mind. So the Vortiem put their mastery of biogenetic mutation, second only to the Comedans, to work. Their entire race was transformed into a new terrifying species in the span of a few millennia. A race of flowing, twisting flesh capable of assuming new and useful shapes on command. A race where there were no individuals, merely parts of a great and terrible meat machine. This might have been merely disturbing, were it not for the second phase of their plan, because the Vortiem began to transform each and every one of their vassal races immediately into more Vortiem. The Vortiem Empire had been a half-unified mass of 100 different species who all owed fealty to the Vortiem. Now they were fully unified because they were literally all one mind, and the 100 species had simply gone extinct in favor of this new species. No one was at ease with this development, but the Comedans, those bizarre energy aliens who possessed genetically engineered clone bodies the same way you'd wear a winter coat, were outraged. They expounded to the other civilizations at length about the danger of allowing a hive-mind civilization to partake in the contest, how a hive mind couldn't truly be a society, and what would happen if the Vortiem won. The Royal Farrakin Naval Scouts had also quietly noted that all along the Vortiem's borders were worlds that once held non-FTL species, primitive but sapient species who might one day ascend to join the great civilizations of the galaxy, except that after the Vortiem's metamorphosis, those species were beginning to vanish. When the Scouts flew by again, those same worlds were flush with freshly morphed Vortiem. The implications had worried even Sag. Even so, the Vortiem were still abiding by the rules of the great contest. They had not invaded any other FTL species. They had not made war on anyone, at least anyone that could send a distress signal. They were just continuing to tinker with their biological technology and develop their hive mind. They were still nominally peaceful, even if everyone but the Vortiem wondered how long that would last.
"But we're not a first contact team. We're just observers,"
Rawson said. Sag rolled all 4 of his eyes.
Well, they wouldn't know that,
He said.
It'd be a little late for diplomacy now, anyway. I'm not going back into Atmo, and they're stuck there. We gathered a fair bit of data. I'm calling this mission complete.
"They do have orbitals,"
Rawson noted, tapping the ship's view screen to zoom in on the primitive space station orbiting the blue, white, and green planet.
Those don't count, and you know it,
Sag said, scowling.
The furthest they've gotten is to that red planet, and even there it's just a few small mining stations.
The moon has more than a few,
Rawson said in his usual placid manner. Sag growled with annoyance.
The moon might as well be Earth. The point is, they can't even make it past the asteroid belt,
Sag said.
If they can't do that, they don't have ships capable of catching us here in the void. We can take a breather. Make sure everything is in order, because I'm not coming back here.
I'm still not sure of that,
Rawson said.
What we saw didn't look anything like commodern technology. What if they didn't give them the spare weapons and the humans just developed them on their own?
Again, it's only been a few decades,
Sag said.
40 years is not enough time for primitives to jump from high-end solid-state projectiles to energy weapons. It took us a few thousand.
But according to the stuff we stole from the Commodans, the humans went from their first cities to having built all of this in less than 10,000. They might perceive time differently than us. Or maybe they advanced just that quickly, like the Commodans say.
That's another problem with you, Rawson. You're too trusting. The Commodans are obsessed with two things, science and status. That report was probably falsified by some dead-end researcher stuck in a sloth body who was desperate for some advancement,
Sag said, wagging a long spidery finger at him.
Remember Gezorp's razor. The simplest explanation is always correct, unless it upsets the king.
But it does line up with everything we've seen. What if it's true?
Rawson asked, twiddling his fingers nervously.
Even the fastest learners on the galactic scale took a few million years to get that far. A few decades might not be so short for the humans. I read they only lived to 100 years old. Did you read the entire report?
Of course,
Sag grunted.
Most of it, more or less.
Rawson sighed.
Even if it's exaggerated, what we've seen now is frightening. They'll have those spaceborne interceptors sooner than you think at this rate. Then parity with the Commodans, the Vortiem, the Bluth, and us. Their only limiting factor will be how few of them there are, just a few billion crammed onto a single planet. If they spread across the stars and multiply, we had better recommend the king send ambassadors next time instead of scouts.
Sag stared at the blue planet they had just escaped from, now distant on the view screen.
Technology or not, the Commodans had to have done something.
Of course, the Commodans fear the Vortiem, what they're becoming. I think they hope the humans might save them. They just have to point them in the right direction.
So what? They finally turned that mastery of biological science towards growing bioweapons? Took them long enough,
Sag said.
I guess if the Commodans made the humans, that would explain a lot.
No! According to the intelligence we received, the humans were not made. They were found,
Rawson said. Sag gave him a look.
So, the Commodans, who have been meddling with alien species for billions of years in their quest to create the perfect life form, just happened to find a species that outperforms everyone else on a backwater blue rock.
Rawson paused for a moment, then nodded his wobbly head.
Yes.
Sag groaned.
Come on, the Commodans have to have done something.
Like I said, I think they warned them about the Vortiem. No more, no less,
Rawson said.
If they're doing anything else, it's very subtle. We would have picked up on the presence of any of their ships or monitoring probes. We certainly would have detected any planet-side installations. We may have gotten chased out, but our scans were quite thorough.
Rawson paused.
Unless, of course, they built something underground.
Nah, the Commodans hate being confined like that,
Sag said. Rawson's hands flew over his control board, and his displays lit up with streams of information as he began to go over the wealth of data they had obtained. Sag scoffed.
Getting a head start on the report? Come on, we'll have plenty of time for that once we go to FTL. We almost got zapped. Let's just take it easy for a bit, he said.
Rossin shook his head.
Not quite. I'm curious.
Sag rolled his eyes again. Curiosity was not a trait usually found in Farrakhan, and he was reminded why the fastidious Rossin ended up with a partner like him. He just couldn't leave well enough alone.
We gathered plenty of information on their technology. Aside from the surprising reveal of lasers and ultra-high-performance atmospheric interceptors, they've got fusion power, early-grade communications networks, no energy shielding yet, but who knows how long that will last,
Rossin said.
I made sure to tap their network and grab some information on their history and culture, too, while we were at it.
Why?
Sag asked.
Everyone knows we Farrakhan are the only ones capable of producing anything decent in the arts anymore. Everyone else is either fighting or doing endless research to win the great contest.
How do you expect to know the nature of these creatures without studying their past?
Rossin asked, taken aback.
Sometimes I wonder what kind of scout you are, Sag.
I follow orders,
Sag said, frowning.
No less.
Certainly no more. Anyway, let me see here.
Rossin trailed off as he focused on the massive flow of information being fed to him.
Oh my! Oh my! Oh my! Only 2 centuries to go from sails to space? So many wars, so many ideas, so many peoples, all slightly different, scattered over the globe, barely unified at all. The Vortiem would take this as an abomination to be corrected. No wonder the Commodans took interest, and it's mostly lining up with their report.
Did you find anything about the Commodans?
Sag asked.
No, not yet. I'm just flipping through the summary the ship's computer made for me. I'll have to do a deep analysis later. Oh, how lovely! They have a thriving cultural apparatus. Music, art, literature, all sorts of things.
Rossin's voice lowered.
If we hadn't bungled things, perhaps we would have gotten along all right. It'd be nice to discuss the arts with aliens who actually care about the subject.
So their nature is artistic?
Sag asked. There was a pause.
No, their nature is emotional, good and bad. They seem to swing from these horrible atrocities to these amazing acts of valor or kindness, and since they're the only ones on their planet, these struggles are always against other humans, like a species battling to better itself, perhaps. I wonder if this is not the secret to their rapid advancement. Everything is clashing all the time. Nothing stays still or peaceful for long. If there are no challenges, humans will create one just so they can conquer it. It sounds exhausting.
Then maybe it's best if they stayed on Earth then,
Sag said.
They sound like they'd overturn the entire galactic order if they made it onto the big stage. No one wants to return to the great wars of the past, even if the contest is slowly turning into a stalemate. It's at least a stalemate you can live with.
Well, it's true they seem disruptive, to say the least, but they also seem so vibrant. It's quite strange, like they're always changing, but always staying the same as well,
Rossin said.
They also seem to have a yearning to discover, to explore, or at least a strong subset of them do. Look at their history. The names of their explorers and discoverers are immortalized, and great swaths of art were created not only to honor them, but also to ask the what-if of explorations that never were. The Commodans might have been onto something. Properly guided, these humans might change everything for the better instead of for the worse. Think what they might accomplish if we take some of their scientists, train them to galactic standard proficiency, and then let them loose in our labs.
Like I said before, Rossin, too trusting,
Sag said, shaking his head.
Yeah, I can see them rapidly learning all of technology and improving on it. Then what? They just share everything they find all nice like? Please. They'd take everything back to Earth and come back with a fleet of planet killers, or detonate some sort of device that rewrites history so we were always their slaves, or something like that.
Sag frowned.
Humans as our overlords might even be a best-case scenario. Think what happens if the Vortiem gets to them first and thinks to analyze whatever makes them so smart and assimilate it instead of just making more Vortiem. They'd have the entire galaxy in the span of a century.
Come on, you don't know that,
Rossin said.
Maybe with their love of exploration, they would map the rest of the galaxy, or even entirely new galaxies. You can't always focus on the negative.
The hell I can't,
Sag said, pointing a finger at his co-pilot.
Or they could help us with their technology like you said, but then keep all the secrets to themselves so the entire galaxy is eventually forced to obey them or have all their fancy human devices shut down. They'd rule the galaxy in all but name.
Yeah, well, maybe they'd advance so fast that they'd leave us all behind and evolve into beings of pure light and will, leaving behind all of their technology for us to take,
Rossin said, huffing.
Now who's being ridiculous?
Sag asked.
I'm only being ridiculous because you're being ridiculous,
Rossin shouted.
The humans have as much potential to help the galaxy as hurt it.
Oh yeah?
Sag asked, pointing to the data displays.
Check the humans' history. How many times have they encountered a foreign civilization without something horrible happening?
Rossin frowned.
Well, I'm still going through it all. There's a lot of history.
How many times, Rossin?
Sag asked. Rossin sighed.
Not many,
he admitted.
But most of those times were a long time ago, and humanity has been advancing very quickly. This time might be different.
Rossin turned back to the flow of data.
But I see your point. It's pretty clear why the Commodans took such a hands-off approach.
I still think they snuck them some tech,
Sag muttered.
Be that as it may, all of this is irrelevant anyway. Whatever will be done about the humans is not our call to make,
Rossin said, switching off the information flow.
I'll have to go over all of this in depth later, but it seems fascinating. The King's Council will have a field day with it. Who knows how long the nobility will take to reach a decision? It's a good thing we've got plenty of time.
That was when the alarms went off. Rossin immediately switched all displays to the wide area tactical view, the interior of the cockpit filling with images of the Sol system and their relative place within it. The blue dot between the orbits of Earth and Mars was them. The yellow dots were all mapped satellites and stations within the system. Those were uniformly around Earth or its moon. The red dots were new, and rising up from the Earth's surface.
High King's breeches! Where the hell did those come from?
Sag said as he pinged one of the dots with a high-focus sensor scan. An image of a spacecraft came into focus, ripping through the Earth's atmosphere and into the void. A long, bulky thing of angles and hard gray metal, bristling with what Sag judged to be sensor clusters and weapons arrays. It was nothing like their small saucer, with its smooth lines and seamless metal construction. With trembling hands, he switched the view around. Most of the dots were similar craft, about the same size as a Farrakhan destroyer or speed frigate. Occasionally he would detect something half the size, all sensors and communications gear save for a bulky drive system at one end.
You said they couldn't pursue,
Rossin said, all placidity gone from his voice.
You said they couldn't pursue! We could have been to FTL by now if we hadn't stopped to catch our breath!
Maybe there was some sort of disaster, and all the ships are fleeing something on the ground?
Sag asked hopefully. Rossin gave him a dirty look.
Even if that wasn't a dumb idea, look at the display. Half the dots aren't ships, they're probes. They're not fleeing anything. They're scouting. They're searching. Maybe for us.
Then we'll make an FTL jump and get out of here.
Sag and Rossin watched with horror as all of the red dots on the tactical display began to pulse with purple light, indicating the sensors had detected the ignition sequence of an FTL core.
They're free,
Rossin muttered.
That many ships with FTL capability and no one noticed? How long have they had them? Why did they wait to use them?
I'm picking up over 1,000 signatures,
Sag said, his voice hoarse.
How did we miss those? We scanned everything on the surface.
But not underground!
Rossin shouted, his 4 eyes widening.
You told me not to use the ground-penetrating scanners because they take too long!
Well, yeah,
Sag said, wincing.
We were only supposed to do a basic scan, confirm or deny what was on the report. Besides, why would a civilization like the humans keep a full fleet hidden underground?
Because someone tipped them off they're being watched, and they think they're going to be invaded,
Rossin said. He slumped in his seat.
By the 5, if they think we were scouting them for an invasion...
Rossin,
Sag began, his mouth drying at the words coming out of them.
Did we just start an intergalactic war?
I don't know,
Rossin said, shaking his head as he sat up and began to warm up the saucer's FTL core.
I don't know, but we need to get out of here, fast! Whatever the humans are going to do, we're not going to be able to do anything about it here. They've got FTL, but it's still first generation. Let's get back to Farrakhan space and pray they haven't somehow invented ultra-long-range trackers 50,000 years ahead of schedule.
Sag reached out and grabbed the controls, turning the ship around and prepping it for FTL. It was almost immediately slammed out of place by the impact of a missile. The little saucer tumbled end over end in the void of space, the rubbery aliens tossed around like toys in a child's backpack. Luckily, Farrakhan biology was exceptionally resistant to bumps and bruises.
How'd that hit us? Do they have stealth missiles now? Where'd it come from?
Sag shouted as he scrambled to get back in his seat and buckle his restraints.
No stealth technology,
Rossin said, pointing to a display that was flashing red.
Our proximity sensors are malfunctioning. Just the wonders of building low-tier ships on a budget. Something probably got tripped up on our rapid escape.
Second-rate ships for second-rate pilots, huh?
Sag snarled.
More or less,
Rossin said.
The missile came from 2 of the frigates that escaped Earth's atmosphere. Unlike the others, they are not powering FTL cores, but diverting energy to engines to intercept us.
Any good news?
Sag asked, finally bringing the ship back under control and checking the readouts. No hull breaches. Armor damaged, but holding. Good.
No,
Rossin said.
If they already know we're here, then that mass of probes and ships is not searching for us.
Isn't that good? It means that maybe it's not our fault this kicked off,
Sag asked.
It probably means they're searching for our base, and by extension, Farrakhan space,
Rossin said.
We're going to have to take the long way home, just in case.
But we will get home?
Sag asked. Rossin shrugged. Sag sighed.
Great.
Not to put any pressure on you, but if our ship gets caught or destroyed, the humans will probably have enough to go on to find our planet, and we won't be alive to tell them we didn't do anything,
Rossin said. He paused.
You did try that, right?
Try what?
Sag asked as he yanked on the controls and slammed his hand on a button. The saucer jerked upward to avoid another missile, and a cloud of chaff nanites exploded out the craft's rear, tearing apart the missile before it could correct itself. Rossin looked at him with an expression somewhere between disbelief and hope.
Try sending them a transmission,
Rossin asked.
A transmission? What the crown for?
Sag asked.
Tell them,
Rossin thought for a moment.
Tell them we come in peace.
I'm a little busy here. You're going to have to handle the comms,
Sag said, sending the saucer into a loop to get the chaff just right on the latest missile.
I can't handle the comms. I'm plotting our course and getting the FTL core primed,
Rossin said.
Just do it.
Fine. Ugh.
Sag's fingers moved from the flight stick to the control board. His fingers typed furiously, and the transmission antennae unfurling from the top of the saucer like a steel tentacle, beaming a desperate message for peace towards the advancing human warships. For a moment they slowed, the barrage of missiles ceasing. Russin's face lit up with a smile.
Did it work?
The prows of the frigate suddenly opened up and disgorged scintillating beams of golden energy. The saucer barely evaded the beams with an emergency dive that nearly caused Sag and Russin to clunk their heads together.
That wasn't a laser. What was it?
Sag asked, swinging the ship around again.
It looked similar to a comet melt beam,
Russin said. Sag pointed a long finger at him.
See, I told you, they did get some weapons from them.
But that doesn't make sense. They only use those for mining and taking samples with their probes,
Russin said, tightening his restraints.
This is like if you needed a sword and just tried to make a really big cleaver. Yeah, it'll work, but it's not what it was meant for.
So where else would they have gotten it from?
Sag asked.
Well, if they...
Russin trailed off, cursed, and started speaking rapidly again.
If a Commandant probe crashed on Earth and they found it, they'd probably have not only some basic Commandant technology to experiment with, but a partially destroyed database as well. If the Commandants were monitoring the planet for a while like the report said, then the database probably has notes on all the species that might threaten the humans. They've gotten a list of potential enemies with no context. It's also probably all garbled up after being both partially destroyed and translated. No wonder they're acting this way.
So the Commandants accidentally made the most dangerous species in the galaxy paranoid that some of their neighbors are going to stop by and try to enslave them?
Sag asked.
Yep,
Russin confirmed.
But that's enough of that. We're getting out of here. Get ready. The core is primed and the course is set. Just give me a 2-second window where the ship can be absolutely still.
Right,
Sag said as he evaded one, then 2 more missiles.
Hold it! Hold it! Now!
Russin entered the final commands. A tense 2 seconds went by as Russin finished coaxing the space-bending machine at their ship's core to wake. All of the displays went mad with static for a brief moment as the core activated, and both Farrakins felt like they were being crushed by the hand of an angry giant. The moment passed, and the Sol system melted away to the comforting haze of FTL transit. Only then did both aliens relax, unbuckling their restraints and leaning forward. For a while they just breathed. Then Sag spoke up.
I can't believe they still shot at us after our message of peace. Do you think maybe their auto-translators were malfunctioning?
Sag asked. Russin stared at him.
They don't have auto-translators. Wait a moment. You sent it untranslated? It must have been read as gibberish,
Russin said. Sag raised his hands.
Hey, they have melt beams and FTL drives and who knows what else. I think I can be forgiven for thinking they might have auto-translators in the heat of the moment,
Sag said.
What a mess! What a crown-condemned mess!
Russin didn't say anything, but leaned back in his chair and just stared at the ceiling with a long, low groan. There was silence for a while before Sag broke it again.
Hey, Russin,
Sag said.
Do you think all this might have unfolded differently if I'd just transmitted a translated greeting when they spotted us instead of blowing chaff and running?
Russin turned and gave him the tiredest, most annoyed glare Russin had ever used in his 1,000-year life.
Sag, you're the worst scout ever.
Yeah, I know.